Good morning, everyone. As Joan said, the Breakfast of Corporate Champions was launched in 2011 by the Women's Forum of New York, and that means this year celebrates a decade of conversations that drive change, conversations that inspire, conversations that accelerate. So we want to start off this morning by thanking everyone who has made the last decade so successful, but also reflecting back on how we started, what we've learned, where we are, and then where we're going. So Janice, let's go back to the beginning. 2011, and you were president of the Women's Forum of New York. Let's talk about why that was the right time to start the Breakfast of Corporate Champions.
Well, can everybody think back to 2010 and 2011? We were coming out of the financial crisis, and press was not really fond of what was happening on corporate boards. Corporate governance wasn't there. And, some said, well, Lehman Brothers maybe should have been Lehman Brothers and Sisters. And that was the problem. There were only 16% women on boards at that time. So the pace of change was so slow, at like 0.5% a year. We were never going to get there. And yet, we knew that women in our Women's Forum and women who had graduated in the 1980s with their college degrees, they were board ready, but nobody was calling them. They weren't in the network. And so we looked at also what was happening overseas. Quotas, Norway, went from 8% to 40% by 2008. 9 countries followed them. And then the UK launched the 30% Club. So everybody was moving ahead, but not the US. So what the Women's Forum did was we stepped into the void. And we said the women are there, and what we need to do is to get CEOs to speak about business imperative is women on boards. And if we remember back to a Warren Buffett quote, he said, one of the reasons I've been so successful, I only had to compete with half the population. So, probably true. So I think that was what was really important for us, and the right time. It was exactly the right time.
And the approach that made the Breakfast of Corporate Champions different and distinct was our focus on the people who could actually make change happen, especially the CEOs. We talked a little bit about the research, but other research also indicated that a lack of priority, a lack of focus was one of the barriers, and the fact that women were not in the CEO networks.
They were not, and so the Women's Forum, Breakfast of Corporate Champions, really had 3 objectives. And you referred to the research, and that's very important because the research from McKinsey and Deloitte and Catalyst and other organizations was really showing that more women on boards, better financial performance. Not a causation, but a strong correlation. And so what we set out to do was to convene as many CEOs, board directors, like we have here today, to speak out about why gender parity was so important. So when you have CEOs speaking, you have their voices, it really makes a difference. And the second thing was that we wanted to honor companies, not a handful of companies, but hundreds of companies like we're doing today, 243, that are above 35%, above the national average. And so we were getting here speakers being honored, talking about how they were making it happen. And that's what we wanted to do, was to spread the word, how do you make it happen? And the third part of our objective was that we needed to put women into the Women's Forum in the database. And so we needed CEOs to sponsor board-ready women, and they did. And now we have over 200 women in our database. But that was getting women into the network, finally.
Our first breakfast was at the New York Stock Exchange, and that had a very special significance for the Women's Forum of New York, right?
Well, New York Stock Exchange is iconic, but one of the founders of the Women's Forum was Mickey Seibert. And Mickey was the first woman to have a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. So we thought, well, that's pretty fitting, let's do it there. And we did, and we were filled to capacity with 300 people. And Mickey is sitting there, front row center, looking at us and saying, you go girls, you make it happen. And she was beaming. So when Mickey passed, we wanted, in her honor, to have an award, the Muriel F. Seibert Award, to be given to one company, one CEO at each breakfast who was really demonstrating what she inspired, and that is leadership in women, but also making that part of the culture of the company.
So when we had that first breakfast, it was about 16% of S&P board seats were held by women. Mm-hmm. And progress has been made, right?
Yes, we started at a very low point, but progress has been made. So if we look from 1995 to 2011, the average annual rate of change for women on boards was 0.5% annually. In the last decade, we've gone from 16% now to 28% as of the end of 2020. And so we've moved at about 1% annually. And if you look just at the past year, from 2020 to 2021, we've moved 2 percentage points. So that's good. We're at 30%, but we want to get to 50% by 2025. So we can't move at 2% a year. We have to move more like at 4% a year. And I know all of you here are going to make that happen.
And again, CEOs play such an important role in driving change, but they've also played a terrific role in the success of our breakfasts over the last decade. Leading CEOs from every sector have stepped up, made the case for parity. So let's talk about why their contributions have been so critical.
Well, the tone at the top in any company starts with the CEO, and that establishes the culture. And that's why our CEO panels, our honorees, our speakers are so important as part of the breakfast. I mean, you all came here to hear iconic speakers about what they're doing and how to make it happen. We have had over 100 CEOs and board directors speak at our breakfasts since 2011. And that is an incredible following. And just look at the room today, you know, post-pandemic, coming out of it, you're all here. So it's really remarkable. And it's also our co-chairs, our honorary co-chairs. Maggie Wilderotter has been 4 breakfasts with us since 2015. And we have Ken Frazier today. We've had Peter Grauer, Roger Ferguson, Richard Davis. So when you have honorary co-chairs like that, people come.
That's right. There's been so many motivating and inspirational stories from our CEO champions, and we captured quite a few in our book, What Makes a Champion, which we issued at the last breakfast to celebrate our 5th Breakfast of Corporate Champions. And in those interviews, we discovered that these CEO champions who are accelerating change had a lot of characteristics in common.
I want to also mention that that book, What Makes a Champion, should be at your tables. It was sponsored by Accenture, so we really thank them for their support in promoting the book. And so Carolyn and I interviewed nearly 40 CEOs about why they were a champion, how they were getting to parity, why they were getting there. And the number one, there were 5 points. The number one point was it was a business imperative. It was clearly imperative that they had women at the top that reflected their employees, their customers, their communities, and their investors. Business imperative number one. They also opened the aperture and looked at skills and people beyond the CEOs. So it wasn't titles, it was really skills and experiences that they were looking for. And third, when they were looking at slates of candidates for their board, they demanded that there be highly diverse candidates on that slate. Not just one woman or one underrepresented group, but a really strong quality group that they could choose from. And four, they took full responsibility. It was their mandate to make it happen on their boards and in their C-suites. And lastly, which Carolyn and I found really impressive, was they took it personally.
Absolutely.
I think, Carolyn, just like we take this breakfast very personally, these CEOs took it personally that they were going to get gender parity on their boards and in the C-suite.
Of course, another thing that makes our breakfast so unique is the scale. We've all talked about how people have come from all over the country for this breakfast. And it's very unique because we've taken on the entire S&P 500 and Fortune 1000. And as Janice said, we salute hundreds of companies, hundreds of CEOs. But that's because we believe that there are opportunities for women in every sector and in all companies. Gender parity is not just for some companies and some sectors, it's for all sectors. So I guess we're here at the end of our decade of driving change, and we have a clear goal for the future. That's parity by 2025. Are we going to get there?
Absolutely, right? Everybody? Yeah? The room is half men, half women. We're going to get there. So let's look at a little bit, the statistics. We are honoring 154 companies that have 40% or more women on their boards today at this breakfast. That means they at least have 4 women. So the trend is in the right direction. And just bear with me on one other point here, because that trend is good. But if you look at the Fortune 500, there are about 5,000 seats. And right now, women hold 30%, or 1,500 seats. In the next 4 years, every year there will be vacancies, 400 vacancies. If you fill just half of those, 200, in 4 years, that's 800 seats added to the 1,500. Then women are at 2,300 seats in the Fortune 500, S&P 500, and we're there. So it's really, why wouldn't we do it? It's simple math, my simple math. And there's so many very talented women out there who are board ready. This is not rocket science. I remember when Deanna Mulligan was CEO of Guardian and on one of these CEO panels at a breakfast, and she was listening to everybody talk, and she said, "We put a man on the moon. We ought to be able to put women on boards." Right, Deanna? Right.
So I guess our goal is to make breakfasts like this obsolete, because we won't need them anymore. So all that remains now is to thank everyone who's been a part of this successful decade of change, to thank you, Janice, for your personal leadership, to thank all of you for coming. We have a great program ahead of us. Thank you very much.